My name is Claire Bergey. I'm a grad student at the University of Chicago, and today I'm going to talk about learning communicative acts in children's conversations through a hidden topic Markov model analysis of childless. And this is work I've done with collaborators Zoe Marshall, Simon Dedeo, and Dan Yurovsky. From their earliest utterances, children aren't just producing language, but using it to communicate. Even at the one-word stage, when their language ability is very limited, children can use a single word to achieve multiple communicative goals. For instance, to identify a person, to question possession of an object, or to call for someone's presence. And from there, they very quickly branch out beyond these initial communicative acts. And by the age of 3, they can request, they can protest, they can ask and answer a variety of questions, and so on. This expansion and the kinds of meanings children can convey happens quickly, and characterizing this process is key to understanding how children know not just the mechanics of their language, but how to use it to communicate. So how do we characterize children's communicative development? Well, most studies, like the ones I just talked about, of communicative acts are limited to a few children at a few time points because they require careful hand coding of interactions and context. So this approach captures a lot about the kinds of meanings children express, but it tends to be pretty limited in its scope. And on the other hand, we have a fair number of large-scale data sets and models to characterize children's vocabulary and syntactic development. Because words are quite amenable to identification and tabulation with the computational tools we have, we tend to approach the large-scale study of children's language development at the level of words. So what we need, and what I'll present one approach to here, is a way to take advantage of large corpora children's conversations in studying children's communicative development. So I'll present an approach to modeling children's communicative acts, working backward from the data we have in abundance, which are the words they produce. First, let me give you an example of the kinds of conversations we'll be trying to characterize. So here's a conversation between a 16-month-old child and his father. I'll give you a second to read it. Right, so both the father and the child are talking, and there's some contingency here, but you can tell that the child is kind of just on his own track, and the father is trying to steer him toward talking about the bell or the flower, but they're not really communicating effectively. And here's a conversation between the same child and his father when the child is 46 months old. I'll let you read it. In this dialogue, the father and child are having a quite complex conversation. They're talking in a way that's fairly abstract about their beliefs about some future non-present event. They're asking and answering each other's questions in a clear thread of dialogue. Just 30 months ago, this child couldn't get onto the same topic as his father. They couldn't even converge on the same label for something. And now they're engaging in a contingent discourse. This is what we want to be able to capture about children's communicative development. So I'll present an approach to classifying children's communicative acts to answer two broad questions. First, how does children's use of communicative acts change over development? And second, how does the structure of children's conversations change over development, so the discourse structure? And the approach we'll take to classifying communicative acts is a hidden topic Markov model. So standard topic models represent documents as mixtures of topics and topics as mixtures of words. So in a standard topic model trained on news articles, for instance, you might have one topic whose distinctive words are fire, flood, and aid, and another topic whose distinctive words are speech, legislation, and administration. And if you classified an article that was about the government's provision of disaster relief, it would be represented as a mixture of those two topics, among others. But those topics aren't pre-specified, so in training, we start with a number of documents, and the model has to infer those topics based on the distributions of words in the documents. And then after that training, it's able to classify each document as a mixture of these topics. In contrast to a standard topic model, a hidden topic Markov model takes into account the sequential utterance structure of a document and not just its static distribution of words. So each utterance is represented as a mixture of topics, and contingency is represented between the sequential utterances. And using this model, we can get classifications on an utterance by utterance level that take into account some degree of contingency between the utterances. So when training the model, you can think of the goal as recovering the underlying sources, the topics from which the words in each utterance spring. So we train this model on the North American English childless corpora on transcripts from children under 16 months old. And the number of topics has to be pre-specified. So we specified that the model identify 15 topics, and more details about how we chose that number of topics are in the paper. After training, here are the topics identified by the model. So on the right are the most distinctive words in each topic, and this is measured by the difference between the probability of the word in a given topic and its average probability over all topics. And assigning labels to these topics is subjective. So we looked at these distinctive words and samples of utterances from each topic to assign labels, which are on the left. So I'll briefly guide you through some of the topic's most distinctive words to kind of validate the model to see if it's capturing the kinds of distinctions that we want it to capture. And the first thing to notice about these distinctive words is that they're largely function words and other very common words rather than thematic or content words. And this is a good sign that the model isn't just capturing conversational topics or themes. The back channels and interjections topic is fairly coherent. It captures words that you use to manage conversation, expressions of agreement and understanding, and also hesitation and negation. So you've got yeah, no, and this topic also includes a lot of the non-words and babbling in the corpus. The social routines topic encompasses greetings like hi, bye, naming family members, mommy, daddy, as well as other routinized interactions like up, down, where's baby, and so on. One topic captures proposed actions, can, come, get, and another requests, you, more, want, have, some. And you'll notice that some topics have more thematic content than others. The request topics, for instance, has a fair number of words about food. And it's likely that the kinds of meaning conveyed in speech, the kind of communicative acts, might be quite correlated with certain thematic domains in children's language environment and in their own speech. For instance, lots of requests happening at mealtime. The labeling topic captures a lot of questions and answers about objects and words and phrases that coordinate attention, like what's this, what's that, that's look at, and so on. And some topics include slightly more abstract content. The mental states topic includes words about thoughts and desires, liking and knowing, and the non-present events topic tends to be used to comment about the past or the future or non-present places. So overall, these sets of distinctive words are encouraging. They seem to be making some intuitive distinctions about the kinds of meanings children express. We don't expect them to map perfectly onto speech act categories, for instance, but there's certainly some mixture of semantic and pragmatic content here. And from here on, because the word topic can be kind of misleading, these aren't conversational themes, I'll refer to these categories as communicative act types. To get a sense for what these communicative acts look like in children's conversations, we can return to the dialogues you saw earlier. So here's the dialogue between a 16-month-old and his father. And here the model identifies a lot of labeling, directing attention. It also picks out a proposed action and a few back channels from the child. And again, here's the same child at 46 months. So here the model identifies a lot of talk about mental states and non-present events. You'll notice that the child and parent are a bit more aligned here on the kind of acts they're doing, and the kind of abstract content of their conversation is reflected in the classifications of these acts. Next, we can look at how children's use of these act types changes over development. And this is the proportion of each act type produced by both children and parents over development in the corpus. So overall, parents have a fairly stable usage of these act types over the age range with some minor shifts, whereas children start off with very few act types and then quickly proliferate over their first few years of life. Children start off using a lot of back channels and interjections, which also include a lot of babbling. And parents also use relatively more of this act type when their children are young. And next, social routines displace back channels as a large proportion of children's repertoire. These include those routinized interactions like greetings, hi, bye, where's baby, and so on. And around the same time, social routines are emerging. Both children and parents also have a bubble of kind of labeling and attention directing. And this accords with work that emphasizes joint attention and talk about the environment in early parent-child interactions. And then by 30 months or so, this kind of talk starts to diminish in both parents and children's speech. And finally, the proportion of mental state talk by both children and parents increases throughout this age range, consistent with both improving theory of mind skills over this age range and also an improved ability to produce a kind of complex syntax that's necessary to talk about mental states. Right, so overall, we find that parents and children have distinct patterns of communicative acts, although their trajectories also echo each other somewhat. Children expand their communicative repertoire quite quickly. By around 2 or 2.5 years old, they're able to engage in a broad variety of these communicative acts. And different communicative acts have distinct developmental trajectories. So it's not just that children move towards using more act types in more equal proportions. Certain act types rise and then fall in usage. And these trajectories accord with prior work on communicative acts and also echo broader swaths of work on the kinds of activities and talk that children are engaging in at these ages. I mentioned that children branch out quickly in their use of communicative acts, and one way to characterize this diversity of acts that children and parents engage in is to measure their entropy. So here we've plotted the entropy of parents and children's communicative acts, as well as the entropy of the words they use. So parents provide a pretty high and constant level of diversity in both these measures over our age range. And children, on the other hand, are starting out with very small repertoire of acts and words, and then are growing most steeply at around 14 months or so, and reach almost parent-like diversity at around 24 months. Okay, so after examining children's proportions of use of these communicative acts, we wanted to ask how children learn not just to produce these acts, but also to use them contingently in conversation. So how does the structure of their conversations change over development? And to do this, we looked at the mutual information between sequential utterances communicative act types. So roughly, how much does knowing the current utterance's act type reduce uncertainty about the next utterance's act type? We did this for parents' utterances given the child's prior utterance, children's utterances given the parent's prior utterance, as well as children's utterances given their own most recent term, and parents' utterances given their own most recent term. So the earliest ages, mutual information between parents and children's communicative acts is very low, but this contingency grows, and in this early age range, the highest contingency is between children and themselves. So one way to interpret this is that children are largely on their own conversational track. They're doing something that's fairly predictable, but it's steered less by what their conversational partner just said than what they themselves said prior. And interestingly, there's an increase in mutual information across all our measures early on, which peaks around 12 to 18 months and then stays steady or declines. This is an exploratory finding, but it points to the possibility that parents and children are engaging with the most sequential contingency when children are quite young. And the steadying or drop off in mutual information could be due to the emergence of higher order discourse structure, which isn't captured in sequential utterance transitions. So mutual information might be low at first because interaction is disorganized. Then it becomes more predictable on an utterance to utterance level. And finally, the sequential predictability declines as longer range discourse structure emerges. And the peak in mutual information in all these measures coincides with children's steepest period of diversification of communicative acts, around 12 to 18 months, as well as a lot of engagement in sequentially predictable interactions like those greetings and social routines we talked about, and labeling and attention directing. This suggests that sequential structure might help children get a foothold in the communicative system that allows them to expand their repertoire. And this is in line with theories by Bruner and others that emphasize the role of routinized interactions in communicative development. And again, these findings are exploratory, and we're looking forward to testing them further in future work. All right, so what do we learn about how children learn to communicate? We found that children expand their communicative repertoire quickly, reaching parent-like diversity by around 30 months. And different communicative acts have distinct patterns of use across development. And interestingly, we have this suggestive finding that the communicative repertoire is expanding most quickly when acts are most sequentially contingent. And this highlights that the relationship between discourse structure and the acquisition of communicative acts might be key to understanding children's communicative development. Overall, this way of modeling communicative acts it allows us to characterize more children's communication across more ages and more contexts. We can take advantage of large corpora of children's conversations in a way that captures their communicative expressiveness and not just their acquisition of particular words or syntactic structures. And this kind of unsupervised approach has pros and cons. One upside is that it allows us to extract patterns in children's communication rather than using communicative act categories specified a priori. So rather than applying a framework designed to capture adults' communicative dynamics like speech act theory or conversation analysis, we can try to find patterns of use in children's communication that might not be important distinctions in adults' communication. And finally, we think this approach helps us get a grasp on the dynamics of interaction in children's communication. So to examine changes in the system of interaction they're engaging in that's dyadic and contingent, rather than treating their communicative development as an isolated acquisition process. Thank you to my collaborators, Zoe Marshall, Simon Dedeo, and Dan Urofsky. Thanks to my lab, and thank you.